In this video, we're going to look at angles. Okay, so basically, in any given shape that has straight edges, you're going to find angles. The first thing you need to know is that, we talked about this in class, so it won't be news to you, that we have points on a shape where your rays or your line segments meet, and those are called vertices or a vertex, right? So one of them is a vertex, several of them are called vertices, so that's a vertex, right? So this shape has 4 vertices. The vertex is where the angles are, obviously, because the vertex is where 2 lines and rays meet. So for example, in this case, we've got different angles with different names. We've got a missing one here. Let's call it H. This one could be P, and so on. Okay, but let's look at X. So if we were going to give X a name, we would call X angle DAB. So look at this. So DAB would be like if you had this set up here, right? So DAB, I'm going to call it DAB, and you want to always make sure that the vertex is the middle letter because it's in between the other 2 endpoints, correct? And you could also go the other way and say BAD. BAD. That could be another name for it. All right, now if you were looking at, let's say, angle R, so angle R would be this and this. It's a bit wonky, sorry about that. That would be, another name for that would be ADB or BDA, right? DA. And once again, we check to see that the middle letter is the vertices. And finally, you might have angle Y, which would be this. We want to make sure that Y is in the middle. So we've got angle Y would be DBC. DBC or CBD. We've got the vertex in the middle there. Okay, so that's sort of the idea of how angles work when they're inside a shape. And the names of angles. Most angles will have 2 different names as long as the middle letter is the vertex. Okay, so let's look at how we measure angles. So here's just a little diagram. You have this diagram in your workbook if you need to refer to it because you forget how to do this. All right, so this is a graphic of a protractor. There are certain parts of this protractor that you really need to be using. First of all, the most important one is the center mark, right? And I'm going to show you on a real protractor in a minute what the center mark looks like. And then you also have the baseline, which is here, and you can tell the baseline because it's 0 degrees. You'll see a 0 on one side and you'll see a 0 on the other side. And angles are measured in degrees, so you might have a 5-degree angle or a 125-degree angle, and this protractor here will measure angles between 0 and 180 degrees. That's what you're going to be learning how to do. You will not be measuring angles larger than 180 degrees. Okay. So once again, this is called a protractor. You'll notice there are 2 sets of numbers. There's an arc of numbers going from 0 to 180 in the middle, kind of underneath. And then you've got an outer scale of numbers, same thing, from 0 to 180. Now, you are going to have to decide whether you're going to use the inner scale or the outer scale when you're measuring an angle. And I'm going to show you how to do that. All right, so let's look at an angle, and I will show you the trick for using the protractor in case you forgot what we did in class. All right, so the first thing you're going to do to measure an angle is you are going to place, actually, one of the things that I like to do is to actually turn the angle around so that I can have, don't turn the protractor, turn the page around when you're using it. It's much easier. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to line up your center mark with your vertex. That's the first thing that you're going to do. The second thing you're going to do is you're going to line up your baseline, which is the 0 line, with one of the rays. And you want to make sure that both are as perfectly lined up as you can get them. And it might take you a little bit of fiddling before you get it right. So right here, I've got my center point lined up, I've got my 0. And then how you know that this is going to work is your second ray actually crosses the protractor. Now, if you do this, you line up your center point and you line up your baseline, guess what? This line is not crossing the protractor, so you know you've got a problem. So you may need to turn your page around until you figure out how to line up the center point, line up the baseline, and have the other ray crossing your protractor. Now we're in a good place. All right, now I'm going to look at where this line, this ray here, crosses the 0. Does it cross the 0 on the inner number, the inner scale, or the outer scale? Well, it crosses the 0 on the outer scale. That means that when I'm trying to read the measurement of this angle, I'm going to focus on the outer scale, not the inner scale, so you can forget about this guy for a while. You'll need him later. All right, so looking at the outer scale, it's 10, 20, 30, 40. It's about halfway between 40 and 50. Halfway between 40 and 50 is 45 degrees. Boom, you just measured this angle with a protractor. And before you finish, you're going to think, okay, well, does 45 degrees make sense? Yes, it does, because 45 degrees is an acute angle. Acute angle is less than 90 degrees, so 90-degree angle would be like that. That looks roughly to be half of a 90-degree angle. So yes, that makes sense. It's not obtuse, it's acute. All right, let's try some more. So once again, I'm going to line up my center point. I'm going to line up my baseline as close as I can get it, as perfectly as I can get it. When I'm really, really happy after I've fiddled a bit with it, I'm going to look at my line here, my ray, and I'm going to see that it goes through the 0 on the outer band. So once again, I'm going to count 10, 20, 30. That looks about 40, maybe 41. So this is a 41-degree angle. I'm going to move my protractor away and I'm going to think, does this make sense? Yes, it makes sense. It's acute. Okay, this one looks like a 90-degree angle, but I just want to be sure, so I'm going to measure it. And guess what? I line up my center point, I line up my baseline, it goes through the 0 on the outer band again. We keep doing outer band, don't we? And it ends up at 90 degrees. So that's really cool. And you'll remember that the symbol for an angle that's 90 degrees is a box. All right. Let's look at this one. So I'm going to line up my center point, line up my baseline. I'm going to look at my 0 on this ray. Does my ray go through the 0 on the inner band, the inner scale, or the outer scale? Well, it's the inner scale, finally. So now I'm going to count the inner scale and I'm going to ignore the outer scale. So 0, 10, 20, 30. And I do have to look at these little notches here. So it's a little over 35. I'm going to say 36 degrees. Does that make sense? Yes, that's an acute angle. So it makes sense that it's 36 degrees. Okay, I'm going to show you one more thing. You will sometimes be asked to measure angles in a shape. And it's exactly the same thing as what you've just been doing. Just imagine that, for example, if you were measuring angle ABD, it's the same as just measuring that, right? It's like you have two rays. Now, I'm not going to try to do this upside down and with my protractor upside down, no less. I'm going to actually just turn the whole thing around. If you're doing it in your book, turn your book around. Same thing. I'm going to line up my center point, line up my 0 line, my baseline. When I'm really happy, I'm going to see, okay, does it go through the 0 on the inner band, the outer band? It goes through it on the inner band. So I'm going to count my inner band: 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, 110. Wow, it's exactly 110 degrees. So I'm going to write down here 110 degrees. And then I'm going to look at this angle. Does this look like an obtuse angle? Because I know that an obtuse angle is larger than 90 degrees. 90 degrees would be something like that, right? Yes, that's definitely an acute angle. So that it makes sense that it's 110 degrees. Okay, and you could go ahead and you could measure all of the other angles. So you might get questions where you have to measure a specific angle, or you might get a question where you have to measure angles within a shape. But the same rule applies. You need to line up your center mark, line up your baseline, then look to see whether the 0 crosses the inner scale or the outer scale, and that will determine which row of numbers you're reading. Enjoy!